Welcome to part 2 of the ultimate needle felted mouse tutorial. So yesterday we made the armature, today we're going to be wrapping the armature. So I hope you find this a really helpful and detailed tutorial. Please don't forget to like and subscribe to my channel, The Dopamine Artist, and I will see you tomorrow with the next part. Take care, bye.
Now the next part of creating our mouse is to wrap the armature in a core wool, and this is going to help us be able to stick the bulk of our wool onto him later on. So I'm going to use a white Shetland core wool, which is got a lovely white colour, but it's also got a good lofty feel to it, so it sticks really nicely to armature. And I've just pulled off a relatively long section, and I'm just making sure that as I pull the section off, I'm pulling it off in the direction that the fibres are flowing. So you don't want to try and pull the wool off in the direction that the fibres aren't flowing, because you'll just end up pulling off very small strands, as you can see here. So I've got my long section, and I'm just going to measure that now and see how long that is before I wrap it around the first part of my armature. I'm just going to split it in half again to make it a bit thinner, so that like before with the pink, we don't get too much ruching. I mean, it's not overly important if we do get any ruching on this part, because we're going to cover it anyway, but it is nice to have a nice smooth base to then add the bulk onto. So I'm going with a piece that's probably about 12 inches long by about an inch wide, but again quite thin in terms of the section that I've pulled off. And what I'm going to do, very much like we did earlier on, is I'm going to lay the wool underneath the piece of armature that I'm going to wrap. So I'm going to wrap this front leg here. So I've got about 2 inches worth of spare wool that's just hanging over the top here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull that across, and I'm going to anchor it round the back of the neck of the mouse to keep it nice and taut. And then I'm just going to move the limbs out of the way, so I've got plenty of space to be able to wrap my wool. And I'm going to hold the wool nice and close to where the pipe cleaner is, so that we're not going to be pulling it off. And I'm just going to twist that round all the way towards the pink section that we added earlier on. And I'm going to stop about when I get to about 1 centimetre of the pink wool. And then I'm going to work my way back again, because we want to leave the pink wool exposed. We don't want to cover it up. Otherwise you won't see all your hard work from when we wrap the feet and the arms earlier on. So we're just wrapping it back up towards the body now, ensuring that it's nice and flat. And then keep going until you get all the way to the top. And when we get at the top, what we want to do is we want to pull that piece as far as we can in towards the body, and then turn it again, creating a bit more bulk at the top of the arm, and that is going to start creating our shoulder for the mouse. And then when you get the fine end that you can see here like a piece of string, we're just going to tuck that in around the back of where we've wrapped the rest of the wool, and it'll keep it nice and tight. And then with this excess piece here, all I'm going to do is I'm going to just twist that around the head, and it just keeps it out of the way and stops us wasting any wool. So I'm going to do exactly the same thing now with the other arm. So I'm going to place my arm over the top of the wool. I'm going to anchor the wool around the neck, holding that with my non-dominant hand. And then once I've got that nice and secure, I'm going to start twisting back round the arm again. Now with the arms, we don't want the wool to be very thick, because later on in our tutorial, we're going to be going back over the arms with a nicer wool, the Gotland white. And if we make our arms too thick now, they'll be really chubby and thick by the time we get to adding the Gotland white at the end of making the mouse. So Again, just keep about 1 centimetre of that paw exposed, and then just go back towards the body, ensuring that you're keeping that wool nice and taut and keeping it nice and flat so it's not twisting. It's staying nice and flat against the pipe cleaner. And with this one, what you want to do is make sure that it's pretty much symmetrical to the previous arm that we've just wrapped. So keep comparing and checking and making sure that it looks similar. And it's not a huge problem if it's slightly different, but you don't want it to be dramatically different because then it's a bit of a bugger to change it. So I'm just going to wrap the shoulder as we have done previously with the other arm. And then once I'm satisfied that that is almost identical to the previous arm we wrapped, I'm just going to pull that excess off. And then with that last tiny bit, I'm just going to secure that, as we did before, behind the back of where we've just felted. So sort of tucking it behind, securing it behind that piece of bulky wool. So we've made our 2 arms. And now we're going to move on to our legs. So I'm just going to pull the legs back in, and I'm going to get myself some more of the Shetland white wool. I'm just going to pull my limbs out of the way so I've got plenty of space to work with. I'm just re-securing a little bit of the pink that is unravelled a little bit. So I'm just going to take some more white wool, and I'm just going to give it a bit of a stretch to make sure it's the length I want it to be, and then I'm going to pull it apart as we have done previously in the direction of the fibres. And then I'm going to take some smaller pieces that we will use then for our legs. We want this to be quite thick this time because we're making quite chubby, cute legs. So with the legs, it doesn't matter if we go too fat because he's going to have little chunky legs. And what I'm doing here is I'm just teasing the wool out to make it a bit longer. So we've still got the same amount of wool, but it's going to be a bit thinner so we can get a smoother finish to it. And I'm doing the same thing with this second piece. You don't want to pull it too hard because otherwise you'll pull the wool apart, but just hold it nice and taut with your dominant hand and then just very gently tease it out with the other hand until you've got your desired length. And then once you've done that, take your piece, and then this time we're going to anchor it around the bottom. So I'm going to just take that inch or 2 and then I'm just going to secure it around the bum of the mouse, or what will be the bum. And then I'm just going to start turning this piece around his leg. And I'm going to do a few more turns this time around the kind of what will be the thigh area to give it that chunky finish. So as we did with the arms, we don't want to go too low on his pink foot. So I'm leaving probably about 5 millimeters of pink exposed so that you can see his pink feet when he's finished. I'll just check that on the measurements. Yeah, it's roughly about 5 millimeters in length. But it's not a hard and fast rule. Go with what you think. A lot of making these creations is kind of going with your eye and the kind of look that you want to go for with your creature that you're making. And always checking for symmetry. That's very important. So I'm just keeping this nice and tight, and I'm just focusing the bulk of the wool around the top thigh. And there's a bit of a gap here where I've got a bit of looseness, so I'm just going to hold it a bit tighter, and then I'm just going to keep turning at the top of the thigh until I've got a nice bulky thigh with kind of a more petite foot at the bottom end. And I'm just securing that around the base of the thigh again, and then I'm going to do exactly the same thing as I have done before with the other foot. So secure it around the bum, move the limbs out the way, hold that with your non-dominant hand, and then with your dominant hand, hold that wall nice and close so it doesn't break away. Keep it taut and move it with your thumb and forefinger very smoothly against the armature, leaving that 5mm of toe or foot exposed. And then remember that we're focusing the wool this time. It's starting to twist here, so I'm just making sure that I'm keeping it nice and flat, keeping the bulk of the wool twisted towards the thigh. And don't be afraid to change hand positions when you're doing this, because sometimes you can't keep your hands in the same position as you're moving an armature around to secure wool around it. So don't be afraid to change your hand position and hold it in a more comfortable and efficient way. So I'm just getting rid of some of the kind of sort of creases, the ruching that we spoke about earlier on. And I'm going to keep going until I've got a similar size thigh to the one that I made a moment ago. And I'm just going to compare them just to check and make sure I'm happy that they are the same size. And I just think looking at them, one looks a little bit thinner than the other. So I'm just moving them back down into position again so I can kind of get a good idea of what they're looking like. So I think I just want to add a bit more wool to the foot on the right hand side as you look at it. So I'm just going to take a little bit more and I'm just going to place it through the middle of the legs and secure it back around the bottom again. And then I'm just going to bring that round until by eye I can see that it looks similar to the other leg. Now, the other thing you can do when you are making sculptures like this, and I would highly recommend it, is to take periodic photographs, because quite often what you will find when you take a photo is that you will see that there is sort of parts of your sculpture that aren't symmetrical or bits that you're kind of not sure about. Whereas when you look with the naked eye, it's quite difficult sometimes to see when something isn't well proportioned. So if you take photos and then look back at that, you can see where you may need to add more wool or felt something down a little bit more. So what I'm doing now is I'm going to wrap the body. So I'm just, as we did earlier on, I'm just teasing that wool out slightly so it's a bit thinner and it's a bit longer. And then I'm just going to measure that. So it's about 1.5 inches in width, and about 18 inches in length. Now don't worry if your wool isn't as long as this and you have to do it in shorter lengths, that's not a problem. You can do it in 2 sections and that's absolutely fine. So what I'm doing here is I'm just going to anchor this around the bottom again. So I'm going to pull this section here between the legs and wrap it around the tail. Okay, and I'm going to hold that in place with my non-dominant hand, and then I'm just going to wrap it around the body as we have done earlier on, keeping it nice and flat and straight. And ensure that the tension's kept there, holding it nice and close. So I'm just kind of like folding it and then pulling it tight, but holding it close when I pull it tight until we get to the top end of the shoulders. So I'm going to go for a final couple of turns here, and then once I've got to this stage, what I'm going to do is we're going to create more of a shoulder shape. So we're going to fold the wool between the arms to create more definition for the shoulders. So what I need to do is I'm going to take my wool and I'm going to bring it and fold it between the arms, and it's going to go down and then it's going to go back up on the opposite side. Okay, so once it's back up on the opposite side, I'm then going to bring it back round, and then I'm going to fold it over the opposite shoulder, over the top, and then I'm going to bring it back round again, keeping it really tight, and then I'm going to bring it back over for a second time around the opposite shoulder under the body and back over to the other shoulder, over the opposite shoulder, back under the body, keeping it really nice and tight, just ensuring that you've got symmetry there. Don't worry if it's not exact because we're going to felt this later on. And then hold it, swap positions with your hands to make life easier for yourself. And then we're just going to fold the last piece of that wool back round the body in the opposite direction. So each shoulder had 2 turns where the wool was passed over it and under it, if that makes sense. So I've just gone back down towards the bottom and I'm going to go back up. And then once I've gone back up, I'm then going to secure that wool in place. So, and I'm just going to secure it by placing it around the head of the body. Twist it round. Like so. So the very last thing we need to do before we can start adding bulk to the body is to wrap that little mouse head. So we're going to take some more wool, and we don't need as much as we did for the body. So I'm going to measure, I'm just going to separate that wool from the bulk of it. I'm just going to take a slightly longer piece because that piece wasn't quite long enough. And once I've separated it, that's going to measure at 14 inches. But don't worry if you've got too much because we can always pull some off when we get to the stage where we're happy. So this time, same principle, hold the wool, anchor it down around the body this time. Hold it nice and tight with the non-dominant hand, and then we're going to keep it nice and tight and we're going to wrap this around the head, and we're creating a kind of a cone shape this time. So we're going to have more bulk at the base of the head and a thinner top half. So I'm going to go past the pipe cleaner and then I'm going to turn it backwards towards the base of the head. And then I'm going to go back up a little bit, focusing the bulk of my wool around the base, and as you can see it's creating that cone shape there. And then once I get to the straggly ends, I'm just going to get those nice and tight, pull it tight, and then I'm going to feed that underneath where we've just wrapped so it secures itself in place. You can see it there, it's all tucked underneath. And then with these pieces here, I'm just going to bring those around the body just to make it easier to see the limbs and keep things nice and tidy. And there you have it. So that's the second stage of our mouse, and we've wrapped our armature, and now it's time to move on to making our bulky body. So I'll see you in a second.